A proposed law in California would make it illegal for landlords to evict tenants unless they've owned the property for at least 5 years. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of the great state of California. And as I have said many times before, California is on the cutting edge of anti-landlord legislation, okay? So basically what this law is going to attempt to do is prevent landlords from evicting tenants unless they've owned a property for at least 5 years. And the reason they're doing this is because they have these rent control provisions in place, and one of the exceptions to the rule for rent control is that basically you can remove tenants from your building if you're going to move into it yourself. Now, the only problem with that is a lot of new owners will buy a building and then immediately evict these tenants in there who are rent control so that they can, supposedly move in themselves. It's kind of a workaround for their rent control law, and they want to stop it, okay? They basically want to remove this exception and make it so no longer can people do this, right? And, I completely understand why we have people buying these properties and trying to do this little workaround, because they've put the property owners in such a situation that they're stuck with these super low paying tenants and rent that doesn't even cover the costs involved with owning the property. So it really, there's a incentive for landlords to figure out some way to work around these rent control provisions and these eviction protections, okay? Now, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think of this sort of insane law that tells you how long you have to own a property before you can evict a tenant. I mean, they're going to catch a lot of people in this net with this sort of law that will, basically make owning the property a losing proposition, okay? It's going to just basically screw a lot of people over. Just as an example, imagine you bought a property, let's say 3 years ago, right? And, finally after 3 years, you're like, hey, you know what? I need to evict these tenants so that, my brother, he can move into here because he doesn't have a place to live. Well, you can't do that anymore, okay? You're just screwed. You're out of luck. You have to wait 2 more years before you'd be allowed to evict those tenants. And, your brother just has to go homeless. Sorry. You can't do what you want to do with your property. That's why I have a problem with these laws, because they don't think of property rights. They don't care anything about that kind of stuff. In my personal opinion, it's unconstitutional, but that's my personal opinion. I mean, I don't know if they've battled this sort of thing in the Supreme Court before, but yeah, it just seems insane. Anyway, this article is coming from abc10.com, and it says, proposed California law would require landlords to own property for at least 5 years before evicting tenants. Let's see what it says. Sacramento, California. A new bill is headed for a committee hearing on Wednesday that could change the process for evictions. AB 854 is a new piece of legislation meant to protect renters from serial evictors and is being introduced by Bay Area Democratic Assembly member Alex Lee. The main change it would make is that landlords must own a property for at least 5 years before they can use the Ellis Act to evict someone. Yeah, so their laws, their rules, their regulations are so strict that they have landlords coming in and having to figure out some workaround just so they can remove tenants from their properties. You know how crazy that is? I mean, they've created this situation with other rules and other laws, okay? And then they think that, the way to fix this problem is by writing more rules, writing more laws. The only thing they're going to do is create new problems, okay? That's all you do. You're creating this net of horrible problems that is eliminating the mom and pop landlords and putting it so that the only ones who can afford to go through all of this mess are very, very large landlords. And all of us small ones are getting caught in this web, and we're getting punished for it. The Ellis Act was enacted by the California legislature in 1986 to allow mom and pop landlords a way to get out of the rental market. Lee said serial evictors and property speculators use the Ellis Act to evict tenants and convert those units into condominiums. What we are going after are serial evictors and speculators who within the recent past are trying to go and flip units. They're buying properties where people exist, evict them, and flip them for profit by turning rent-controlled units which especially have vulnerable seniors and people of color or low income, and turning them into market rate condominiums, Lee said. Yeah, if you're getting completely out of the rental business, right, or if you want a family member to move into a unit, then you can finally evict these rent-controlled tenants. And one of the way that property developers are doing this is they're buying apartment buildings and they're turning them all the units in them into condominiums. So they're getting completely out of the rental business, and then they are selling those individual units off. And it's a good way to make a profit. And that is one of the few ways that you have of making money with a rent-controlled building. But they don't like that. They don't like the fact that they put that sort of exception in there and that developers and investors figured out a way around it. And unfortunately, now they're trying to block you from doing that. But only thing they're going to do is discourage investment. And by discouraging investment, that means that the housing stock will be older, it'll be in worse shape. And, because there's no way for a landlord to make a decent profit when all of the rents are, strictly controlled by the government. You have these price controls, socialism put into place by the government. Then they wonder, well, why are all these buildings falling apart? Why are they in such bad shape? Well, you did that with this socialist system that you put in place called rent control. Since 2001, more than 27,000 units in Los Angeles have been taken off the rental market using the Ellis Act, which has displaced more than 60,000 Los Angeles residents. In San Francisco, more than 5,400 folks have been forced out of their homes in that same time. Lee said he believes the new bill is part of a three-pronged approach to solving the housing crisis by preserving units that are already affordable. Well, they think that they can force landlords into providing this affordable housing. Well, it doesn't work. I mean, how many times have there been... there's been so many economists, there's been so many people that say, hey, this rent control thing, it just doesn't work. There are so many problems with it, and they still can't figure it out. So they're like, oh, well, maybe if we do this will suddenly create more affordable units. No, it won't. Okay, it will not create more affordable units. What will happen instead is developers, investors, etc. will say, hey, we're not going to invest here in California, or we're not going to invest in Los Angeles anymore. Instead, we're going to go invest where we can actually make money. And when the investors stop doing that, what happens is, the housing stock, it just starts falling apart, and you end up with these, commie block, places. You go into it and it's like, well, they haven't refurbished this place since the 1970s because there's no profit in doing so. People are living in places that they're livable, but they're in horrible shape. Okay. Or what they might do is they'll build brand new buildings that aren't under rent control. I believe if you build a newer building, then it's not under rent control anymore. Or they'll just tear the complete building down. They'll tear the whole building down and build a new building in the same site. They'll do something. They'll figure out some way to completely remove these units from the market, and there'll be less and less and less rent controlled units. And that's exactly what you're seeing right now. Okay. The number of rent controlled units isn't going up. It's only going down. And at some point it will hit zero. Okay. Rent control is a non-workable policy for investors. If you want to build affordable housing, really the only way you can do it is by sharply subsidizing through, tax benefits for developers, or the government itself building this sort of affordable housing for the public, because there's no way that rent control is going to work long-term as a solution. If this bill were to sign into law, it would mean that thousands of Californians have stronger tenant protections and will not be unjustly evicted just because someone's flipped the property, Lee said. So especially during the pandemic, it's incredibly problematic that folks are being forced onto the street. And so that's why I think it would have the scale of thousands and thousands of households being saved from undue evictions. Lee said the bill wouldn't change anything for landlords who have owned their property for more than 5 years. It would only change for landlords who have purchased the property less than 5 years ago. So they're disincentivizing turnover within the rental market. They're disincentivizing people to sell their properties or buy properties because they would be unable to get rid of these tenants. They would be unable to do anything. So this would actually have a negative effect. It might actually devalue property, make real estate worth less, and result in less tax, less property taxes for local governments. Result in, just a lot. This results in less revenue for the state overall. They don't think about things like that. Okay, and it's always some politician putting this in place who has no clue whatsoever how the market works, how real estate investing works, and they think that we've got this big huge pile of money and we'll make plenty of profit, even though we can't pay our mortgages, even though we can't pay our utilities, even though we can't pay for maintenance. Somehow they think that profit can come out of thin air if we provide this affordable housing with no benefit to ourselves. No. Nobody in their right mind who is a real estate investor would ever buy a property if there was no profit to be made. In fact, I'll go even further. The banks won't finance properties unless, have you ever heard of the debt coverage service ratio? Basically, unless a property, makes enough income to be able to actually pay that debt off, I think it's 1.25. You have to make, at least 1.25, or the cost of the mortgage times 1.25 in order for them to even finance it. So you might not be able to get financing for your property, And these morons who, I'm a city councilman, you don't know math. You don't know basic math because, basically the banks won't lend on these properties. You're making them worth less by putting rent control on them, and you're disincentivizing people in even investing in them. So, stupid new law, stupid city councilmen or state legislators or whoever who are trying to implement this stuff, and not surprised at all that this kind of garbage is happening in California.